Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn. I'm so glad you found me. If you are not new here, welcome back. I appreciate you guys so much for stopping by. I can't tell you enough how much I love and appreciate you. All right, before we get started, go get your snacks, go get your drinks. You know, the huge. And while you're doing that, I have to show you guys the cutest little thing my stepsister sent me in the mail. It made my whole day. And it's the inspo behind our new little sign here. Oh, my chair. True Crime and Fab Wine. She sent me this little wine bag. So cute. I love some good wine, love a good bevy, love some good true crime. So it's perfect. And I wanted like the same quote, but good and wine wouldn't fit on the line. So, oh, that rhymed. Focus, Sherilyn. So I had to go with fab, which I had to use a thesaurus to find a 3-letter word for good. And yeah, the wine inside is, you know me and names. Muskoka Lakes. I think I've heard of this. So I think I actually said that like pretty right. If not, sorry, that's not unusual for me. And it's cranberry wine. Oh, 10% alcohol. I see. She told me to be careful with this and that it tasted like juice. So, perfect. So we're gonna have that tonight. I iced my cup already. Perfect. Okay, let's try her out. Ooh, I like this. This is so good. I don't like a really sweet wine. I prefer like a more dry wine. I like reds. Usually in the summer, I'll do like a little bit of a dry white, but this is like a dry red white. I will definitely be having more of this. Oh my God, it's so good. I was just gonna put it down so we could get started, and I don't know if I can. As soon as you put it down, you're wanting more. I'm understanding like why she gave me the warning. So thanks, Shannon. Okay, so last week we talked about, oh my gosh, Dorothea. That crime was like an older lady taking out her tenants for money, where this story is of a younger woman taking out elderly women for money, get this, to fund her shopping sprees. Like if there was ever the reason for the death penalty, I feel like this woman is it. So let's get started. The woman we're talking about today is Dana Sue Gray. I don't know if you've heard about her, but usually when I see like stories on her, they explain her as the Shopaholic killer. Basically because, I mean, there's no question about it. After she killed her victims, she would take their credit cards or their checkbooks and go and spend an exorbitant amount of money. But I think that there was like so much more deeper to that. Dana was born on December 6th, 1957. Her mother was a woman named Beverly, and Beverly was a former beauty queen and an aspiring actress in her younger years. She had caught the eye of people at MGM, but it just didn't go anywhere. I think like in her mind that the fact that she had gotten like very close to making it in her mind gave her this like sense of entitlement and made her feel like a starlet. She's explained as somebody who is quite outgoing and very charming. Just based on kind of what I could read about her, didn't always make the best decisions, and I think that was part of her kind of doing like over the top things. Maybe that was like, you know, the performer in her. I feel like she was always seeking attention, trying to like get a rise out of people. Yeah, just not always making the best decisions for like a role model. Prior to meeting Dana's dad, she had 2 sons from a previous relationship, and then she meets Dana's father, and he's a gentleman named Russell Amherst. He's a hairdresser, so I think they like got to meet each other through like that beauty community. He had been married, I believe 2 times prior to meeting Beverly. I don't think that he had children prior to that. After they got married, they tried several times to have a baby together, but they miscarried each time. And then finally they had Dana, and they kind of felt like she completed that family. They had already had, you know, 2 boys, and now they've got the little baby of the family who's this little girl. About like a year into Dana's life, there was a shift in Beverly, and she started taking a plethora of prescription drugs. She also started racking up a lot of debt on credit cards. So her and Russell were fighting quite a bit about money, the fact that she was abusing drugs. It sounded like he really cared about Beverly Beverly though and wanted to make it work, but his breaking point was one day he came home and Beverly was in the front of their yard in a physical altercation with this older woman that was one of their neighbors. And for him, he said that that was his breaking point and the marriage was over that day. So Dana is just about 2 at this time, and she primarily lives with Beverly from this point forward. She does see her father, but it's only like a couple times a month. And from a young age, I think she didn't feel like she was getting the attention that she wanted from her mom. Her half-brothers had landed some gigs that got them attention, so Dana felt like Beverly was kind of giving them a little bit more of her time, because I'm assuming she was like, okay, well, they're kind of doing what I aspired to do. Maybe I'll be like a momager. Got like that Kris Jenner in her coming out. And so one of them had landed a commercial. It was like a skydiving commercial. And then the other brother was a part of a band and they booked a gig at Disneyland. So Dana was feeling that her mom loved the boys more than she loved her. Since she felt like her mom was very responsive to her brothers getting, you know, like gigs and one of them being in a band, she tried to get attention by using one of her brother's guitars and playing a concert on her driveway. After that one attempt, she felt like she wasn't getting the same response as her brothers were, so she shifted her bid for attention in rebellion. She'd do things like crawl into her brother's bed when he was away playing shows, and she'd pee in it. And she did this not like just one time. She would do this even if he was just going to a friend's house and he'd come back and his bed would be wet. I read that this went on for several years, and it just got to the point where he was so sick of all of the things that Dana would do to try to get attention that he ended up going to live with one of their great aunts. She also had gone into her mom's closet and taken her mom's favorite dress and cut it up. And I also read that her and some friends in the neighborhood would take neighborhood animals and they would, you know, jimmy rig some form of catapult device, and they would catapult these animals into the backyard pool. So right away, it just kind of shifted from like something kind of cute and positive to, on the other end of the spectrum, psychotic. It sounds like Dana's mom did notice that, okay, you know, like maybe I need to give her a little bit more positive attention. She tried to turn things around, but at the point that she was realizing that maybe Dana wasn't really on the right path, it almost seemed like it was too late. Anything that she tried to do that was like maternal, Dana took as authoritative. Like she felt like she was trying to boss her around, and she already felt like she was kind of on her own anyways, making her own decisions. So anytime her mom tried to, you know, get involved and help, it pushed her further back. And this pattern would follow her for any authority role in her life. She was a smart girl, it sounded like, in school, but she didn't do well because she didn't respect her teachers. She was always battling with them. And anybody who was of authority, she always had her backup and on the defense. When she was in her preteens, she was exposed to a lot of behavior by Beverly that was not appropriate whatsoever. She liked to date. She liked to see different men, and a lot of them. And she would bring these, I guess, suitors, if you will, to the house. And oftentimes Dana would, you know, walk into the backyard and they'd be naked in the pool, or she would walk into, you know, promiscuous situations. And psychologically, I think it messed her up quite a bit. Her mom would also have boarders come and live at the house too, because she was getting involved in Scientology, and she was putting all of her money into the church because, I mean, I'm not familiar with Scientology, but from what I could gather researching, in order to move up levels, you have to pay money for the courses. So that's what she was investing her money in. And her older son, who had, you know, gone off and was playing in a band, he was doing quite well, and he was trying to use the money that he was making from the band to keep the house afloat. but they were in like rough times. So Beverly's solution to it was to have boarders in, and they could split up the rent and save money, and then they could keep their house. So some of the times they'd have people living in the house, and sometimes they'd even have an overflow of boarders where they'd be like in their trailer on like the front lawn. One of these boarders that's on the lawn is somebody who preyed on Dana when she was 12 years old, and she lost her virginity in this trailer on her front lawn. So there was always that like contention between the two of them, and there was never a chance for them to rebuild that relationship, because when Dana was 14 years old, her mother died of breast cancer. She was close to her mom at the time. She spent all of her time at the hospital trying to take care of her. When she did pass away, Dana went into a severe depression for about a year after that. After her mom passed away, she goes and lives with her dad and his new wife and her daughter, and Dana doesn't like them at all. So now there's another situation in another home environment that she's coming into, and everybody's butting heads. And so her brother can see that there's this struggle and this battle, and I think he felt bad for her that she didn't have any outlet or hobby or something that she could just submerge herself into. So he was into skydiving, and so he thought it'd be a good idea to take her on a skydiving trip with him. This first one, he just wanted her to observe, so he wanted to see how she would do going up in the plane and then watching him go. And he said they were like holding her back because she's like hanging out of the plane wanting to jump so badly, because she just thought like it was the coolest thing she'd ever seen. So she does her first jump, and from that point forward, she became like this high adrenaline junkie. So at 16, she ends up leaving her dad's house because they found drugs in her room. So she leaves the house and she moves in with her 28-year-old jump master. I'm not familiar with, jumping, but I'm assuming this guy's got like a lot of them under his belt or something like that. And so yeah, their relationship was primarily based on like high octane sports, And from what I could tell, he was good for her. He was older, so like that probably wasn't ideal. I think he was like 12 years older than her and she was underage. But he helped her graduate, and he also pushed her into nursing school, because when she was helping her mom and always at the hospital with her mom, she felt like she was very belittled and mistreated by the nurses at the hospital. So she wanted to be everything that she wasn't receiving when she was at the hospital. She and Rob were together for quite a few years, but ultimately the relationship ended because Dana had a lot of resentment towards him, because there had been a couple times that they had gotten pregnant, and Dana really wanted to have kids and didn't. So he had convinced her to terminate both pregnancies. It just ended up being something that she couldn't get over, so the relationship deteriorated. After that relationship, she gets in another relationship, and this one sounds very tumultuous. It lasts 5 years, and I think the basis of the relationship was, again, just high adrenaline sports. They did a lot of traveling, but that relationship fizzled out, and then she moves back in with her father, Russell, and at this point now in Russell's life, he is remarried again, and he's married a woman named Jerry. And they're living in an area called Canyon Lake. This place, it sounds like a nice retirement community, but it's not specifically geared towards seniors. There are some young families there, but primarily it's like a retirement community. And all of the neighbors, they can just like get around on their golf carts. They've got like nice little rivers and a golf course on there. So by this point, Dana's been a nurse for a few years. She's primarily working in Emerge, and she's also helping to deliver babies. By all accounts, she's a good nurse. She doesn't necessarily get along the greatest with her other co-workers. She's described as like a bitch who just keeps to herself and just tends to her patients, but from what I could tell, the patients themselves didn't have an issue with her. It was just like people surrounding her. When she's moved back in with her dad, an acquaintance of hers that went to school with her in junior high, he catches wind that she's back, and he's really excited because he's had a crush on Dana since the day he saw her in junior high school and all throughout school, but they were more acquaintances. They didn't hang out in the same circle, so he was always scared to approach her and never had that chance to let her know that he had a crush on her. So he was really excited to hear that she's back. And at the time, he was a pilot flying like those small jets that would have like, you know, like advertisement banners behind it. And he said that he'd be up in the air and he'd try to find where she was because he knew what kind of car she drove, and then ultimately found, you know, which house was hers from flying over top of her house. I guess we can look at it a few different ways, like precious, romantic, stalker. I think like from the air, he had planned to, you know, go down and show up at her door and like let her know how he felt about her all these years. But what ends up happening is they run into each other at the grocery store and he just sparks up a conversation with her. And from that point forward, they started dating. They start by just dating casually, and she had plans to move to Australia and travel a little bit more. So she ended up doing that and they parted for a little bit, but that didn't work out. So she comes back and they start things back up again, and then ultimately they get married. I think on the surface, and even to them, I'm sure, their marriage seemed like very ideal. There was no abuse or infidelity or anything like that. I think the only struggle that they had is he was in a band and like more of like an artsy guy. That was his hobby, and her lifestyle was a lot more high energy, high adrenaline, and he had to adjust to that. So he tried to keep up with her and would do things to appease her and show her that he was, you know, interested in her hobbies. And I read this one incident on their honeymoon, actually. They decide to go out windsurfing, and he's not the best. So I believe he had taken a lesson and he was pretty pooped out after the lesson, but Dana wanted to go back out on the water and then just windsurf together. So they're windsurfing and all seems well. I think they do it for a little bit and he's getting pretty gassed. She had made her way back to shore. He's trying to make it back, but he's so pooped out from this lesson and then going back out there with her when he was already tired. And she's just sitting on the beach in a daze, he said, just like staring at him, watching him. And the more he's trying to get back, he's getting like caught up in like the tide or the waves. I'm not a windsurfer, so I don't know, you know, the proper terms. He's getting caught up in the water. So he keeps calling her name and she's just staring, watching him. And he's really struggling. He thinks that this is it. He's gonna drown. He says that eventually Dana comes out and she gets on her board. She hooks up her board to his and he thinks like, okay, thank God, like maybe she just didn't hear me. And she just starts to bring it back in. And he, at this point, isn't on it. I don't know if he had fell off of it while it was going, but he's not on it. And he's calling for her to stop and she just keeps going. Now he's stuck in the middle of the ocean with nothing. And so she gets back on land and she's sitting there just still watching him. And now he's really so he's trying to stay calm, trying to float, and he finds a buoy and he grabs onto the buoy and the rope and he just drags himself back to shore. And when he finally makes it, he goes over to Dana and he just starts screaming at her like, what are you doing? I almost died out there. And he said she never replied back to him. She just looked up at him, looked away, and they just sat there. And he laid down because he was so exhausted. He said they lay there for about an hour and a half, not saying a word. They got up, went for dinner, and just never spoke about it again. At that point forward, he said that he was not necessarily scared of her because he still stayed married to her, but there was something off he felt and he didn't ever want to bring it up again, but almost had a guard up at that point. Things didn't really improve from that point. Not that they had any more episodes of him feeling like she was just gonna let him die in the middle of the ocean, but they didn't make a lot of money, and for the amount of money they made, they spent way more than they made. So they got into debt really fast. Dana had this need to spend, and she liked to spend a lot. Similar to her mother, she had this form of entitlement that she deserved all of the things that she got and deserved to live this like higher lifestyle that she had, but didn't have the money to compensate and would blame everybody around her for like her struggling or her in debt. And that entitlement also kind of flowed into not just finances, but her relationships with people in her family. One of her half-brothers, he had completely written her off after so many attempts to try to make the relationship work, but anytime they got in an argument, she would essentially gaslight him and write him letters like, oh, like, are you gonna forgive me now? Are you gonna be a little bitch? You know, like, he was never validated to feel angry if she did something messed up. One of the brothers had completely written her off. The other one, he had seen, you know, something in her that he just wanted to nurture and help. He could see that she was struggling, but felt like there was like a good in her. So he didn't give up as easy, even though she treated him essentially the same. He just had a little bit more patience. They did have one significant blow up between them though, and it involved their great aunt, who ended up taking him in when he left home. And basically it was because she was elderly and she was starting to go a little bit senile. I don't know if it was dementia, but she wasn't all there and she would get confused very often. And in her will, she had the primary beneficiaries as the two brothers. And Dana wasn't going to receive as much when her aunt passed away. And this she couldn't get over. And she would go and visit her aunt in the hospital with papers trying to get her to sign over equal rights between the three kids. So that was one argument that lasted a really long time, and I don't think that it ever fully got repaired after that. And I mean, I just feel so bad for the aunt because the woman's not even dead, and she's just aggressive enough to the point that her family members are stepping in, being like, give this woman a break. Like, she's got no idea what you're talking about. And it really does all revolve around money and what she feels like she's entitled to, because when it came to her dad and her stepmom, she started to build up this big resentment towards her stepmom. She was taking care of her mother-in-law and providing for her a lot more, and Dana felt like she deserved for them to help her and her husband instead, because they were newlyweds and they were gonna lose their house. So you guys should be helping us and bailing us out. She can hold her own. You don't need to take care of her. I also think she had this disconnect because Jerry's mother-in-law, she was a woman named Norma, and Norma wasn't her mom or Russell's mom. She was Jerry's husband's mom, and Jerry was married to a gentleman for 30 years and he had passed away, and she was really close with her mother-in-law. So after she passed, she had taken on the role to care for her mother-in-law. For whatever reason, there was this resentment that was bubbling and growing in Dana about that relationship. So as Dana got further in debt, her relationship started to show some fractures, and it wasn't helping that Dana really wanted to get pregnant and she couldn't. She would cope with this by spending more. She also started drinking, and her relationship, it turned abusive, but almost in the sense where it wouldn't be obvious to even the person on the receiving end that it was, you know, physical abuse, because she would say like, oh, like, I'm so angry, I just need to hit something, and he'd be like, okay, you know, like, hit me. And it would just progress from there, where she would just expect it, and so she would just, you know, like, come up and stalk her husband and release her stress by hurting him. Then she also started to like slowly alienate him from his friends. The very few friends that he had left started to, you know, just taper off because they would go to the house and she'd almost be jealous if he laughed or was having a fun time and she wasn't in the room and it wasn't her that was making him laugh. So she, again, had a resentment towards these friends now that he was having a good time with. So this would have been a really good opportunity for him to get out, but then she gets pregnant and things start to get better and they have got a new focus and excitement, but she ends up miscarrying. And then they try fertility drugs, and it seems like when she gets on fertility drugs, her outbursts and tantrums take like a turn for the worst. But her husband's able to explain it away and, you know, give her justification that she's got a lot of hormones pumping through her body now, which, I mean, yeah, I would probably agree with that. So somebody who's already on, like, you know, teetering the edge of sanity, having extra hormones pumped through your body is probably not going to make you better. As they're trying again for a baby, it sounds like finds a little bit of footing in the relationship. He starts to do things more for himself and starts back up with a band again and hanging out with a couple of old friends. And Dana seems a little bit more receptive to this and wants to support him. So she starts going to band rehearsals and watching the band play. And there she meets their guitarist, and he brings his toddler along. And so she's in her glory because she can play with this toddler, which is, fulfilling that maternal need of hers because she wants a baby so bad. They become friends with them and start hanging out more with this gentleman and his son. And one night, Dana get into an argument, and she wants to leave this house party that they're at. So she asks this guitar gentleman to take her back to his house because she's pissed off, doesn't want to go back home. She calls in the morning and she says the relationship's over and she's running off and she's going to start a relationship up with this guy. Soon she, tries to take it back, and they briefly get back together again, and she gets pregnant. They're all ecstatic. The relationship is going to be repaired again. And then she miscarries again and does this whole flip-flop between guitar guy. So Dana feels now that her marriage is over, and she goes into a depression and starts seeing a counselor and taking antidepressant medications. She's going through a divorce, and she also loses her job at the hospital because she's caught lying on her patient's charts, and she's saying that she's administering more painkillers than she actually is, and what she's doing is she's pocketing the extra painkillers that she's saying is on the chart and keeping it for herself. I don't think she ever told her family specifically why she lost her job. I think she said she was being used as a scapegoat because they thought she was like a bitch. They just let her go. Okay, I have a hair and it's driving me crazy. Wine break. Oh my God, you guys, this wine is so freaking good. I wish I could share it with you. So she ends up moving in with guitar guy, and she had started dabbling just kind of in like a side hobby business with silk screening. So when she got fired, she thought she was just going to take this opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into, entrepreneurship and focus on the silk screening business. I think one thing that she really enjoyed in this point of her life was that living with this boyfriend of hers, she got to spend a lot of time with his son. And I think family members thought that she was in the relationship just for the son because she wanted a kid so bad. And just based on like what I could read and the attention that she gave for him and everything that she did, just him and her, that's probably safe to assume. I just think that she was in a complete shitstorm in all relationships in her life at that time, because on Valentine's Day of 94, she calls her ex-husband and she gets a hold of him through his parents because he doesn't want her to know where he's living at the time. So in order for her to communicate with him, she has to call his parents. She gets a hold of him and she says that she's desperate to talk to him. He says she sounds like very exasperated on the phone and just like a little bit off. And he gets this pit in his stomach and there's just like something screaming inside of him not to go and see her. He agrees on the phone that he'll go and meet up with her. As he's leaving, there's just something in him that says like, don't do it, man, don't go. So he doesn't go, and he doesn't call her and say that he's not going to go. He just doesn't show up. And from what we know now, I think it's safe to say that that completely pushed her over to whatever brink of sanity she was on, because what she ended up doing that day was going over to Norma's house, who is Jerry's mother-in-law, so Dana's essentially step-grandmother. And this wasn't just an acquaintance of her. This wasn't just, like, oh, my dad's wife's mother-in-law. They knew each other very well. They were a close family. She had this resentment towards her that people did know about, but she also, a year prior, had temporarily moved in to take care of her, and Dana, being a nurse, was the perfect caregiver. So this wasn't just, like an acquaintance who she saw, like once every couple of years. She definitely knew this woman, and she was a grandmother role to her. What we know is Dana went to Norma's house, and 2 days later, Norma's friend Alice couldn't get a hold of her. Initially just chalked it up to maybe they just kind of kept missing each other. Maybe they were trying to call each other while the other was out. She wasn't quite sure, but after a couple of days, that was very unusual for them not to speak. So she goes over to Norma's house and the front door is unlocked. And initially she doesn't think much of it because if Norma was expecting somebody, she would leave the door unlocked because she was very hard of hearing. If she had company coming over and they were ringing the doorbell or knocking on the door, oftentimes she wouldn't hear it, so she would just leave it unlocked. So that wasn't unusual. But what was unusual was she's walking through the house and Norma's car's there, but it's silent. And usually if Norma's home, people who knew her said the sound of the TV in her seating room was so loud that it would almost like give you a headache because she'd have it up full blast. So the eeriness of the silence just gave Alice this really bad feeling. But she starts looking around the house and eventually she finds her in her seating chair in front of her TV, and she finds Norma with a knife in her chest and one in her neck. And it just makes you want to cry, because sometimes when we tell these stories or we listen to these stories, it's so hard to realize sometimes that these are real people, and then so these people that, find their siblings or find their best friends or find their spouses, they become a story when we're hearing it, but they're real people. And poor Alice, she never got over it. She was always terrified. And after that moment, there was a piece of her that was missing because Norma was like a sister to her, she said. The detectives arrive and they're doing like a sweep of the house and they're not seeing that anything of value is missing. Norma's got expensive rings on and jewelry and they are still there. Her purse is there and everything seems to be intact. And the only evidence that they can find is this very faint Nike shoe print at the front door, and it's a size 6. So automatically they're like, okay, either it's a little dude or this is a woman who did this. So not long after they get there, obviously family comes over. Jerry and her husband, they live just down the block because they're all within the Canyon Lake community. Off the hop, as they're asking Jerry questions, they notice that she's got Nike shoes on. So automatically, they're a little bit intrigued. And then as they start questioning her, they find out that she might be the last person who saw her alive, because just days before, she had delivered groceries to Norma, but she said she didn't see or talk to her. She said that when she got to the house, the TV was so loud that it took everything in her just to like unload the groceries as fast as she could and just run out. So to the detectives, they thought like, sure, who comes in and doesn't say like, I dropped off your stuff? But to her, she said that was very normal because of how loud, the noises in the house could be. Obviously that's not enough to arrest somebody, but they've got her in like their back pocket. 12 days go by and Dana's driving around with her boyfriend's son, and they end up at a woman named June's house. And June is a 66-year-old resident of the Canyon Lake area as well. And she's also friends with her parents, Jerry and Russell. June is described as a very fit woman. She was really healthy and into like nutrition and diet. She loved to play golf, so that's usually what the family friends would do. But her husband had recently passed away, so Jerry and Russell said that relationship kind of shifted a little bit because it was almost like she didn't want to do like couple things with anybody anymore now that she lost her husband, and she was focusing on spending more of her time with other widows. But occasionally they would like see each other on the golf course and have, a good conversation. There was no animosity, it just they didn't hang out as much as they used to. So Dana shows up to June's house and she's outside just raking up a little bit of leaves in her front yard, and she's getting ready to go play a game of bridge with her friends because they want to do something to celebrate her birthday. And so Dana tells the little boy to stay in the car, says she'll be right back, and goes up to June. And she asks her if she can borrow a fitness book that she had suggested to her about a year prior when Dana was trying to get pregnant. And she said to her, I've been drinking a lot lately. I'm trying to get in better shape, and I'd really like to take a crack at that book that you suggested. Do you happen to have it? So June's like, yeah, I know exactly what book. Just hold on one second. I'll go in and get it. So Dana's waiting outside and June goes in. She comes out pretty fast with this book, and Dana's like, Yeah, no, not that book. I think if I can take a look at it, I'll let you know which one it is. Can I come in? And so June's like, I gotta go to this game, but yeah, just come in and yeah, show me which one it is. So they go in the house and June's escorting the way. And what it sounds like is as she's walking in front, Dana is putting on latex gloves and she's looking around for something that she can use to subdue June. So she's looking around and finds a telephone that's hanging on the wall and she quickly takes the cord off the telephone. They walk over to the bookcase and while June's bent down to go and get the book, Dana wraps this telephone cord around June's neck. Like I mentioned, June was very fit for her age, so she's struggling and she's putting up a really, really big fight. So Dana is struggling with her, trying to keep her under control, and she drags her over to this chair that's in her living room. And so she wraps this cord around the chair so that she can get on top of June, and there she starts to strangle her with her bare hands. And it sounds like June becomes unconscious. But just to make sure, Dana sees this very, heavy, fancy wine decanter and she takes it and she beats June with this decanter. It's complete overkill. And from there, she goes over to June's purse that's sitting on the counter and she takes her time rifling through her wallet, picking and choosing which credit cards she wants to use and take. So she ends up going with a Mervyn's card and a Visa. Once she grabs the cards, she just hops back in the car like nothing's happened and goes shopping with her boyfriend's son. The first stop they go to is a high-end diner. They have a lunch there. From there, they go and they get mother-son haircuts, which we'll see later on ends up being like one of the breaks in the case. While they're there, the little boy is referring to Dana as his other mom to the lady that's cutting his hair. So she's talking with her hairstylist, saying how cute it is and that he recently started calling her that. So Dana ends up getting a perm while she's at this salon and it turns out quite frizzy, which is going to also be important later on. After their hair appointment, they go to this leather store and Dana gets this like fringe leather jacket and some leather boots. Then they head over to a jewelry store and she gets these diamond sapphire like teardrop earrings. She then goes to Mervyn's to use June's Mervyn card and gets a bunch of toys and some new jeans for the little boy, new clothes for her, and new clothes for her boyfriend. Their last stop that day is at a Save-On and she gets a bunch of groceries, some smoke, some vodka. She also happens to see a boogie board on her way out and just grabs that too. And they get to the house and her boyfriend's like, where the hell did all of this stuff come from? She says that her ex-husband had given her a credit card and so she just decided to go on a shopping spree with it. Then he's pissed because he's like, we don't need somebody else's money, rip up the card. Meanwhile, while this is happening, June's friends are worried because she's supposed to be at a card game with them and she hasn't showed up yet. They head over to June's house and she has her house keys in her golf cart on her driveway. So they grab the keys from the golf cart, they go inside and they find June. So when the detectives get there, automatically they start seeing there are similarities to the two crimes. And then they find out June and Norma know each other. So for the next couple days, Dana is just racking up June's credit cards. She's going to fancy lunches, she's getting massages, going to get her nails and her pedicure. She's stockpiling her house like the an apocalypse is about to hit, getting toys for her boyfriend's son, just over the top. And the credit card company obviously sees like a flag on this card. And in the 90s, like they didn't call you and say, hey, there's suspicious activity, we canceled the card. They sent a letter out in the mail and June's kids received this letter. So they took that to detectives saying, listen, like there's this activity after she's already died. Whoever did this is using her card. It's been about 12 days since June's death, and Dana walks into this antique shop, and a 57-year-old woman named Dorinda is working in the shop this day, and she's by herself. Dana goes in and says that she's looking for a specific frame that she wants to frame this photo of her mother in. So the way the store is set up, it sounds like the frame area is off to the back so nobody walking by can see that far into the store. So Dorinda's like, yep, sure, follow me, let's go over here. Very similar to June's attack, Dana follows Dorinda, and when she bends down to show her some of the frames, Dana slips a rope across her neck and she starts strangling her. Dorinda, she puts up the fight of her life. Dorinda says one of the last things she remembers is as Dana's strangling her and she's trying to fight and ask her why, she says, I'm not here for money. Just relax. Just relax. And Dorinda says the tone almost reminded her of a nurse who was trying to, console a patient. So like little did she know this psychopath was a nurse. Dorinda loses consciousness. I don't think we'll ever know for sure if Dana did think that she killed her at that time, but Dana let go. She went over to the till. She got $25 and she left the store. And about an hour and a half later, Dorinda thankfully regained consciousness and she called the police and she was able to give them a description of this woman. From this description, she provided quite a bit of accurate detail. So it was spread all over the news and she was described as a blonde woman with curly hair, about 5'2", and somewhat attractive. So now they've got an accurate description of what she could look like, and detectives are also starting to talk to all of the employees and stylists that Dana's hit throughout these past couple weeks with June's credit card, and that's starting to match what Dorinda's saying also. So now they're feeling like, okay, this is like a serial killer and all of these women are linked. One of the best clues comes from the hairstylist who had previously done Dana's hair and given her the perm, because after the description came out and it was explaining this blonde woman with curly hair, Dana asked if she could dye her hair red. And that stylist said no, because her hair was too fried from the perm and she didn't want to do further damage. From what I could gather, Dana ended up leaving there and going somewhere else and having it dyed red. She also got them to cut the perm out too. So now she was rocking like a shorter red do, totally different from the description of what was being shared on the news. So this one hairstylist doesn't know that she's gone and had her hair dyed. She just knew that Dana was inquiring about it. So she shares that with the detective. And he goes back to Jerry because he's still feeling like she's gonna be this missing link. He doesn't believe that she's involved anyway, but he feels like she's gonna be the one who notices or sees something, and she's gonna be the one to piece this all together. So he goes over and says, do you know anybody who recently has dyed their hair red, who has a child or a stepchild, and has recently, come across a lot of new possessions? And no one's coming to Jerry's mind at that time. So a few days pass and she says Dana shows up to her house and she opens the door and Dana's like, hey, look what I did. And she's sporting this, chopped up red hairdo. It wasn't like an aha moment instantly. She was just kind of like, oh, okay. So she's not connecting that yet. And as they're talking, Dana shares that recently her boyfriend's son has started calling her mom. And so now the gears start turning and she doesn't really want to go there. She's not completely convinced that this is Dana. But when Dana leaves, she calls the detective and she says, this is now starting to sound a little bit like my stepdaughter. She says, my stepdaughter just showed up. She's got her hair cut. It's red now. And she just told me that this little boy has started calling her mom. So he asks what the boy's name is, and it matches the client sheet of the boy that Dana brought into the hair salon. Now he's pretty much 100% convinced. He knows that Dana's the one who's done this. But like we know, it doesn't work like that, and they need more evidence and they need to follow a protocol. So he can't just go and arrest Dana. He needs to write up a request for a search warrant, present it to a judge, get it approved, and then go and arrest Dana. Everybody get your drink right now. You're gonna need a sip for this one, okay? The detectives are preparing their report and they request like a surveillance team from the department to join forces so that they can keep an eye on Dana's house while they go and submit this request to the judge. That way they've got somebody keeping an eye on her while they can't be at the house getting this warrant. This surveillance team it sounds like they're not like within the department. They're about an hour away. So it takes them a little bit of time to get there. And when they get to Dana's house, nobody's home. That morning, she she woke up and she went to apply for a job. It sounds like when she left, she was very agitated and embarrassed because she has always had this entitlement, but because she was a nurse, now she's applying for these like minimum wage jobs and just feels like if she walks into a place, she should just be granted like management position. So she's driving around and she ends up about 15 minutes away in like a little, it sounds like kind of like a sub county to where she lives, and it's called Sun City. And she sees an 87-year-old woman named Dora Beebe getting into her car. So she follows Dora to her house. Dora has just left an optometrist appointment and she's going home for about a couple hours, and then she's heading back out and taking her longtime partner companion to an appointment that he has. Sounds like she's made it into her house, and then Dana goes to the door and knocks on it, and she tells her that she's lost. So she asks her for directions, and Dora says she's not really good with providing directions, but she's got a map. So she asks Dana if she wants to come in for a second and she'll go and look for the map. So Dana's like, yeah, great. You guys. I'm sure we already know where the story is going, but it breaks my heart so much because this woman, she just sounded like such a little precious, like I explained in Dorothea Puente's story last week. There's just this part of me that I just want to like put old people in my pocket, and it's just how you can do things to an elderly person is just beyond me. How you can do something to anybody is like incomprehensible, but especially somebody who's so defenseless. And the more like I learned about this woman, like she was such a sweetie. She was very active in her church. She was outgoing member in her community. And on that day particularly, it had been 15 years to the day that she had lost her husband. So it was already, a tough day for her. And then Dana walks into her life. It's just one of those situations too where you're just like, oh, why? Why did everything align like that? Why? Especially because her family and friends say that she was not somebody who would normally answer the door to somebody that she wasn't expecting or didn't know. And that day she did. And of course she sees like this woman in her mid-30s who, doesn't seem to be a threat whatsoever, and just thought she was helping her out. Almost exactly like the other attacks, Dana follows Dora into her house, looks around, finds a phone cord, and strangles her with it. Dora also puts up a fight, but ultimately Dana ends up overpowering her. And again, she's already using a weapon to strangle her, but she also likes to use her hands, which is like so much more personal. And then not only that, but she takes it further and sees that Dora has a iron close by. So she goes and grabs this iron and she beats Dora with this iron across her head. It's with so much violence that the iron actually gets dented. She then finds Dora's wallet and she grabs a credit card and her checkbook, and she heads out and goes on her next shopping spree. She hits up this stationery store and goes and gets like a really expensive day timer and really high-end pens. And it just makes you wonder. She's gone to an interview earlier on in the day. She's got these like aspirations to start up this like silk screening business. Clearly, she's got high hopes that she's going to have a lot of appointments, that she needs this fancy dancy day timer. Like if you had a game plan, I just don't understand. To me, it's so beyond insane to be like, yeah, I really want to be an entrepreneur. And, in order to make money, you need money. So I'm going to just commit these homicides and then, take what I can from there. And then my business will flourish and like everything will be good. I don't understand the thought process. After the stationery store, she heads to a health food store and gets like these dietary supplements because usually she's quite like a very fit, active, toned woman, and recently she's like put on about 20 pounds. So she saw this advertisement for this weight loss supplement, so she goes in and gets that, and then she heads back to her boyfriend's house. So now surveillance has her returning and they've got eyes on her. She leaves the house again. This time she goes back to Sun City and she stops at a bank machine there. She pulls out some cash and then she hits about 3 different grocery stores and grabs different things from each of them, but she could have got it from one. Maybe she didn't want like something to flag like as too big of a purchase, but regardless, detectives are like, why are we going in circles here? She could have just got all of this at one place. And as they're following Dana on the shopping spree, Dora's companion, who was waiting for her to take him to his appointment, shows up to Dora's house because it's not like her to be late or not show up. He knows something's wrong. So he goes to Dora's house, and unfortunately he finds her there. He calls detectives, but this is a different jurisdiction. So the detectives who are already on Dana's case don't know about Dora yet. So by 5:30 p.m., Dana gets back to her boyfriend's house, and roughly 15 minutes after she arrives, detectives show up at the door with a search warrant, and they take all of them in for questioning. They take the son, they take the boyfriend, and they take Dana. So they've got one crew back at the station with them, and then they have the other one investigating the house. And here they can see almost everything, like a trail on June's credit card, showing up in this house. It looked like Christmas there. You know, before you had everything completely unpacked and it didn't really have its spot yet, it was just like a boogie board over here. Hordes of food, piles of jeans and clothes and toys just everywhere in the house. So they start questioning Dana, and she's got an answer for everything, as they always do, you know. She said that she had an annuity, and so she pulled out funds from that, and that's why she was able to buy all this stuff. She said some of it came from an aunt who had recently given her some money too. She said some of it was gifts from her boyfriend. And even when detectives were like, listen, June's credit card statements have come through. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we've got barcodes on all of these items that you've purchased, and they're matching the store barcode to the barcode of the item on the credit card statement. This is June's credit card. And she was like, I don't know how that could have happened. I have no idea whatsoever. She just thought she could outsmart them by just talking in circles. Ultimately, after hours of questioning her, it comes to a point where she breaks a little bit, and she says that she was at a store and she saw a man try to use a credit card and it didn't work. So he got frustrated with it and he just threw it out in the garbage. And she thought, oh, somebody just threw a credit card out. Let me have a crack at it. So she said she didn't even look at the name. She tried it and it worked. And against her better judgment, she was going through a lot of stress, and spending money and buying things made her feel better. She started using the card, didn't even realize that it was June's card, this woman that she knew. And so detectives are going back and forth between rooms. They've got somebody talking to Dana's boyfriend's son, keeping him distracted, and they're also questioning her boyfriend. And he kind of sounds like this like no bullshit, very straight shooter kind of guy. He had nothing to hide. And he was almost off-putting that they disturbed him from having his meal and his dinner. And whatever Dana was up to, he didn't know about. He didn't particularly care to like bail her out or be any support to her. He was just like, what do you need from me? I didn't do this. Can I go back and have my meal? And I need a cigarette. Between interview rooms, one of the lead detectives sees that there is a detective from another jurisdiction that is using one of their investigation rooms or something like that. And so he asks him, hey, what's this guy doing there? And he said, oh, you know, like just about like 15 minutes away, there was a murder of an elderly woman. So I'm just using some resources here. And nothing really clicks instantly with the detective. Goes back in to interview Dana. They keep pressing her. She keeps denying. They keep showing her proof. She keeps denying. And then she breaks a little bit again, where she goes back to the whole, like, I'm stressed out. I've been through a lot. It was just a moment of weakness. And I'm really scared to talk to you guys because I just found a purse. So she says earlier on in the day, she found a purse, and in her moment of weakness again, she used a check from it. So this isn't sounding familiar to the detective. So they're like, whose check was it? So she says, oh, I think it was like something Beebe, like Betty Beebe. And this name isn't on their radar, but the one detective's like, okay, shit. He excuses himself from the room, goes back to speak to the other detective, and he's like, what is your victim's name? So he says, Dora Beebe. He's like, hey, yeah, wait here a second, you know, look no further. I think I've got your suspect in here. So he goes back and he starts talking to Dana about Dora. And now they're like, okay, that woman that you just stole that checkbook from, we just found out she actually was just found hours ago dead. So now you're telling me this is the second person whose check or credit card you found and they died hours before? Like, how are you going to explain this? And what's sickening is she said that when I saw, the purse, I just thought like, wow, woo, this is great. I needed some money. I really needed to like fill this urge of shopping because I'm so stressed out and it just makes me feel better. They interviewed her for hours. She never admitted anything in that interview about killing either of them, but they had enough to arrest her. So they take her straight to jail, and her boyfriend was released because they didn't feel like he had anything to do with any of these crimes. And just based on reading Dana's actions after she went to jail, this woman just has like zero empathetic bone in her body. Very similar to like the JODI ARIAS case. It sounds like she's just so used to manipulation and throwing tantrums that she thinks that she's above punishment or she can manipulate her way out of it. And her biggest concern when she got to jail was that the food she was eating was just so horrendous. And anytime her dad called or visited, she would break down crying, saying that the food they're feeding her is so disgusting that she just keeps throwing up and she's so sick and she needs a vegetarian-based meal because it's a little bit better. She needs him to pay for that upgrade. So I think as she started realizing the evidence that's stacked against her, she clued into the severity that she probably wasn't going to get released from jail, and she couldn't afford a defense attorney. And the appointed defense attorney she felt like wasn't going to suffice. She needed a private defense that she wanted her family to pay for. Oh my God. You guys, again, you have to have a sip of your drink. As if this family of hers and the other victims haven't been through enough, she gets in a huge argument with her father and stepmother because she's saying, why don't they sell Grandma Norma's condo and use the money from the sale of the condo to fund her defense team? The grandmother she killed, she wants them to sell her condo and use the money of the condo that she killed the grandmother in and pay for her defense for killing all these women and the grandma. You can have another set. I told you guys. I told you at the beginning. So when it came time for her to enter her plea, she initially enters a plea of not guilty. And then over the course of time, she tries to change it to an insanity plea. When you do that, you go through different assessments from different doctors. They weren't buying it. They knew that every action that she had, she knew what she was doing was wrong. She was cleaning up after herself. She was stealing things from them. She was going out and spending money after. Like, she wasn't insane. Her defense lawyer at this point knows that her best shot of not getting the death penalty is taking a plea deal. Her plea deal that she took was to plead guilty to her assault on Dorinda, the murder of Dora and June, but not Norma. And her sentence would be life in prison without the possibility of parole. Plus, she also relinquished her rights to appeal her sentence in the future. So she'll spend the rest of her life in jail. She's in the Chochilla Women's Prison in California. And to this day, she's never admitted killing Norma. I don't think she ever will. And in that case, they didn't have enough concrete evidence to completely link her to it. They did find a shoe in her boyfriend's home that matched the shoe print in Norma's doorway. But I suppose there's, the argument that she was her granddaughter, so it wasn't unusual for her to be at the house. She never used any of Norma's cards to make purchases. There was nothing that was really linking her to that exact date. And I think they were willing to just take the plea deal and guarantee that she would never ever be released again. So I really feel for her family because I can't imagine how devastating that would be, that they know she did it. And then, coming to terms with the fact that the person who did this is, your child or your stepchild. It's just that struggle would probably just be so gut-wrenching. The whole thing is just, it's so senseless. I mean, these poor women, they lost their lives to what appears to be, this fulfillment of this woman's stress and her release of her stress by shopping. But I also think that it turned into a thrill for her. This woman is somebody who loved, high adrenaline, sports, and needed like that energy pumping through her. So the thrill, I think, of killing, and just the fact that it was always an overkill. It was never just killing someone and taking their card and leaving. It was like she just took everything to an extreme. So when I see, that she did this just to fulfill a shopping need, like there was so much more that she was like releasing on these women. That is exactly why at the beginning of this story, I told you if anybody deserves the death penalty, she's it. And take a trip to the electric chair. I don't even think they have the electric chair anymore, but they could bring it back for her. They could bring back like the guillotine for her. No, she would need something worse than a guillotine. You know what? Remember when I talked about in the Hello Kitty case, the Jurassic Park amusement park? Yeah. We'll have her be like the first convict on the park. But yeah, you guys, that's it for me today. We're gonna have another one of these because that was one of those stories. Let me know your guys' thoughts. Let me know what kind of like velociraptor cross, whatever we can come up with to get this park in motion for these people. I think that's what we're really needing to focus on here, you guys. Anyways, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so, so much. I will see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.